Welcome to The Mothers, a podcast that centers the voices of women from across America whose children were killed by police. I'm independent journalist Georgia Ford.
And I'm Niko Georgiades of Unicorn Riot. During this episode, we hear from Hope Coleman. Her son, Terrence Coleman, was fatally shot by Boston police officer Garrett Boyle at his mom's apartment. In many ways, Hope's story is similar to the story that Tony Biegert told us of her son in episode 5 of this podcast series.
My son's name was Terrence Coleman. He was 31. He had schizophrenic paranoia. He sat outside for almost 3 days on October 30th, 2016. He sells CDs and DVDs and stayed at the steps around the house. At this time, he needed to be seen by the doctor. I called the doctor on call at the South End Clinic in Boston, Mass. The therapist said, call the ambulance and take him to Tufts University, where he was diagnosed for schizophrenic paranoia, like maybe 12 or 13 years ago. So this night, where Terrence sat outside, I called for the ambulance, the police came. I said, I didn't call for the police. I called for the ambulance. My son don't need to see you all. Well, we'll give it a try. I said, no, you won't.
Yeah, this unfortunately is another incredibly sad story of a mother seeking assistance for her son. And the police ended up killing him.
So at this point, Hope said that she made that separation for the officers from initially speaking with her son to allow time for EMS to show up. Because again, she didn't call for the police, she called for emergency medical services.
Yeah, and then she explains how the incident unfolded, how she was a witness to what happened to her son, and how her family was treated afterwards.
So 7 minutes or 5 minutes later, the EMS drove up. I'm double parked in front of my house. The police truck was parked behind mine. The ambulance guy gets out and says, where's your son? At this time, my son went in the house, and the EMS, I brought him inside the house. He was down the hall, sitting in his room. He asked him, Terrence, can you come out in the hallway? Quietly, my son walked out in the hallway. Meanwhile, the other EMS is by my table. I have a glass table. He's standing by the table. There's a knife on the floor, a little small knife on the floor. And so he sees it. So I tell him where to take my son to the hospital. Which hospital? I told him to send my son. I shut the door after the EMS left. All this happened in the hallway. My hallway is small. My son standing next to me, the two EMS standing in front of us. The door from coming into my apartment, the hallway door was cracked a little bit. You can see the police lights flash, the blue lights. My son didn't need to see the blue lights. The EMS said, okay, you're going to go to the doctor. My son said, no, I don't want to go. I said, Terrence, let's just go and get checked out because you have asthma. I want you to get cold. So he said, I don't want to go. So the EMS said, you're going to go. Meanwhile, the EMS is walking up towards him. So my son turns, and he said, you're going to go now. And he raised that voice, now. That's when the two cops that was out there from the beginning when I called for the ambulance, the same two cops was out on the steps, but they pushed the door open, came in and knocked me and my son down. I was knocked down next to my son. I'm screaming and yelling, what part of the body you shoot my son? The detective come in the hallway, got in my face and said, get out, get out. I said no, over and over. What part of the body you shoot my son? He said, get out, get out. I wind up in the street next to my truck screaming. I'm the only one out there screaming, and the police, there's a whole street just full of police cars. My grandbaby came up, opened up the door. She seen when my son's eyes went in the back of his head. She shut the door, went back downstairs. I'm screaming and screaming. My other granddaughter, she come upstairs, open the door, and she sees my son handcuffed. My grandson, David, he was downstairs in the basement when all this happened. All 5 of them was. I have 5 grandkids. He took the 5-year-old, his youngest sister, and I believe he was 14, put a blanket over her, and when they heard the 2 gunshots, he took a blanket and put it over his sister and covered her up and went behind the couch. My other grandbabies are yelling out the window. Meanwhile, the police went in there and told them, don't say nothing when you go outside. Don't say a word. I saw my kids coming outside the house, all 5 of them. And I'm yelling, where you taking my grandbabies? And he says, tell the parents to come get them at the headquarters. I'm screaming and screaming because they're already traumatized and heard the shots. I needed my grandbabies at that point. Meanwhile, my husband's still in the basement. The 2 officers didn't know that he was still there. My husband told me that they said, we did a good job. We ain't got to worry about him no more. We did a good job. We ain't got to worry about him no more. We finally got him out the way.
Say fuck 12. Say fuck 12. Say fuck 12. Say fuck 12.
You're listening to Hope Coleman. She's speaking about her son, Terrence Coleman, who was killed by an officer with the Boston Police Department.
Next, Hope talks about rushing to the hospital after Terrence was shot, how she heard from the doctors that her son was killed, how authorities then told the story, and then the impacts that traumatization had on her family.
I went to the hospital. I rushed to the hospital. I had said my son was shot by police. Where's my son at? They told me to come in the room. I go in the room. The 2 doctors said, I'm sorry. He didn't make it. He was shot in the groin and abdomen. I just ran out, screamed. Meanwhile, the police are in the ER, supposed to be seen because they were injured or whatever, saying my son was swinging the knife back and forth in the hallway, which was a lie. Then later on that night, the commissioner gets in front of my house when I was gone to my niece's house and said, the mother's a liar. She wasn't there at all. I was there. He wasn't there. And my son didn't have a knife or anything. My son has a bag of CDs. My son has no record, had nothing. He don't swear at anything. That was my child. It took my child away from me. The year 17, my husband passed, and I said, I'm making sure everything that he said to me is what I'm going to repeat. Because he's here with me now, him and my son. My grandbaby's traumatized. My youngest granddaughter, Taylor, she went to school, told the story. She had to walk in blood. I have twin girls. They don't even want to look at an officer. They know it. They all do the same thing. They all stick up for one another. The EMS stick up for one another. And the point is, stop damn lying and put yourself in my place. Speak the truth. Speak the truth.
You're listening to Hope Coleman, in episode 8 of the Mothers podcast presented by Unicorn Riot, featuring hosts myself, Georgia Ford, and Niko, Georgiades. Music in this episode by DJ Skizz, raps by MC Longshot, recording by Malcolm Wells, and post-production by Different Worlds Music Group.
And thank you for tuning in to this episode. Hope, she lives in the south end of Boston, and Dan Fight, a pretty incredible journalist with me at Unicorn Riot, visited Hope in her apartment. During his visit, he was able to see a lot of the art that Hope has then put her life into. He was able to see the CDs and the DVDs that her son used to sell. He was able to see basically how Hope was living and how she was remembering her son every day and how she needed to sort of channel some of this pain that she has into art. He also heard from Hope during this time, and Hope then talked about more of the issues of the handling of the mental crisis.
Yeah.
And how, as we've talked about in these episodes continuously, there needs to be a different response possibly than the way the police then respond to a crisis. They don't come in a de-escalatory stance, and a lot of times, as we've talked about even on episode 7, mental illness plays a part in 1/4 of the police killings. This is Hope talking more about that and how the system deals with mental crisis.
In the statement of how many times they came to my address
It doesn't matter how many times. They say, oh, a dozen of times. So a dozen of times and then you call again and then your child get killed. That's not professional. That's a scary thing. If I had known the statement that they made and put in the paper for what the officer said, I would never call 911. This is the fear of mental health. People are not going to want to call for help because they don't have trust in the police. And for them to make a statement of how many times, I didn't know there was a limit. And it's on my conscience. I feel bad for calling. I feel bad being a mother calling for help. There's no respect. There's nothing. That's how I feel. Because they failed my son. They killed my son instead of helping my son. There's a lot of people here that has mental health issues. I wish I never called. But then I'll be a parent that's not getting help for my child. How many times do you have to call for 911 and they complain about it? Oh, so we'll just kill him this time. And then on top of that, they brag about after the fact, after they killed my son. Oh, we did a good job. We ain't gonna worry about him no more.
In episode 5, we spoke about the regret that Toni Beager felt after calling for help for her son and him ending up dead. In a very similar vein, we hear that same pain from Hope.
I never think that I'll be in a situation where I call for the ambulance and I wind up with no son. I regret the fact, but I was doing what a mother's supposed to do to help her child. I didn't call for the police, but they still came first. But, you know, I'm just fighting for justice. I'm going to keep on fighting. I don't care how long it takes. Because I now, as a parent, fight for other people with mental health. When I get a chance, I go to the cemetery and visit him and his father. He should have been burying me. I'm suffering because I wish I never called 911. I call that number and I have no son, but he's here in my spirit. He's telling me to keep fighting. And that's what I always will do, fight for him and everyone else that's suffering. A gun shouldn't even been involved. A taser. But I'm the witness to my son. If I wasn't there, I still wouldn't believe the police.
So you hear Hope speaking about fighting for justice through the pain and trying to create better policies when handling mental crisis, sort of the same that Toni Beager was trying to do. And she also mentions how Kim Handy Jones has really helped her.
Yeah, I mean, when we met Hope, it was at a banquet that was put on by Kim Handy. And I just remember Hope sharing with us how much it meant to her to have this sisterhood and to have this community of other mothers who, you know, while everyone's situation is different, they're all grieving the loss of their child.
Yeah, and you could tell Hope's pain was a little bit more introverted as well. And even the way she spoke about the trauma that she felt from that day, the trauma that her grandkids then felt, how she then felt after her husband died, and how she was sort of just now all alone trying to fight this battle herself.
Yeah.
But this community of grieving mothers, sisterhood, this was able to allow her to keep afloat.
Right.
And we've seen her multiple times now come across the Twin Cities area for other different marches, for the Mother's March, for the banquets that you bring up. And it seems to me that this support group is an incredible feature in her life. Because as we talk about and as we feature in this whole podcast series, these moms are dealing with all this trauma, all this pain, and then they're able to actually support each other and create something better out of that. Maybe it's not better, but it's something to deal with it in a more positive light.
Right. Well, to have support, to have community. And what's crazy to me is here we have Hope from Boston. You have Toni from Wisconsin.
Green Bay.
All these mothers from Minnesota. You know, it doesn't matter the state or the city, the parallels in their stories, right? And the only way we would be able to draw these parallels is by having conversations with these women. And for us, going to the banquet where we met Hope and where we met a lot of the mothers, we not only saw this community, but we were able to see that this is an isolated problem. This isn't isolated to the Boston Police Department, like in Hope's case. This isn't isolated to the Green Bay Police Department. These experiences of children being killed by police, right? In some cases, responding to a mental health crisis, then the role the media plays. Yeah. They feel like their child's been demonized. And then the lack of accountability in the criminal justice system. Usually, the officers are not convicted.
Yeah, and as was in this case.
Yeah. So it's just, to me, what I hope for those of you who are listening and have been following along, I hope you start to see, many of our episodes are not based on high-profile cases.
True.
But that you hear from the mothers who first-handedly are having these traumatic experiences after their child is killed by police. And so many of them are saying the same things. And so this isn't an isolated issue. This is a systemic issue.
Yeah, and in this case, a lot of times it just continues to go back to what could be a possible alternative. There is in Brooklyn Center, after Daunte Wright was killed by Kim Potter, there was a quick action to include Kobe Heisler, who was also killed by Brooklyn Center Police a couple years back, who had autism, to include both of them on a new sort of policy change for public safety in the city of Brooklyn Center. And that was able to happen pretty quickly, to where they're trying to get responders now that aren't the police to come to medical needs. And it seems like that's going to be possibly the way forward. If we're going to have this system where it is, how it is, they need to change the way the 911 dispatch gives out the call to the police and not have those mental crisis calls go to the police, and instead have an alternative. And as we see even on the north side of Minneapolis, they tried to get the Travis Jordan bill to go through. And from there, again, people are trying to change some of the legislation and the policies around these police departments' reactions, but that doesn't seem like it's stopping these murders from happening.
Well, especially when you think about the fact that those are all city-issued bills or ordinances. So, yeah, I mean, does that mean that each city has to have a police killing in order for them to get a bill that will prevent this from happening in their city? Right? Why does the cost of change continuously have to be black blood? Why can't the police department in Indianapolis look at what happened in Boston and say, oh my God, let's get some legislation? Why can't, on a federal level, the presidential office look at what happened in Boston and say, we don't want that to happen again? We want to make sure that people who are suffering with mental health issues are protected and that they get the help that they need when their loved ones call the police.
Exactly. And as was mentioned by Hope, there seems to be maybe a quota on how many times she could even call for help. Something about, you called too many times, we can't help you anymore. Or even hearing the officers say, it's good we got rid of this person, we got him out of here. Like this, to me, yes, there's so much change that needs to happen within the structure of how they respond, but then also their response and how they're also treating the community, how they come into the community, looking at the community as enemy combatants so often. But yes, even going into how many times can you call? So what is an alternative? What is an alternative to 911 if you have a child with an issue that needs some help? And a lot of times, these moms are stuck alone. And now she's still continuing to feel that pain from thinking it was her fault.
Yeah.
And as we talked about as we talked about with Tony in episode 5, it's one of those situations where we have a mom now dealing with the loss and then also dealing with the pain inside of them that thinks it's their fault. So here we're gonna hear from MC Longshot with the song called Hope.
Only 31, Terrence Coleman got assassinated by a cop's gun. It ain't no joke when you kill a mother's kid without a bid or even getting fired, denying the facts of what they is. Who should we trust when it's just us against the whole system? We never get to say goodbye, we just get to really miss them, never kiss them or hug them again. We losing men, women and children, but never hope. That's how we'll win. Shattered dreams getting picked up by parents trying to preserve. All hope ever wanted was for Terrence to be heard. Through his music or his hustle, we all mentally struggle, but that don't mean we should be murdered amidst the tussle. Flex your muscle of compassion, asking instead of bashing. How we supposed to feel protected when violence is your reaction? These families out here hurt, or you going home to yours without ever giving a care. How a community's torn, it's up to us to fix it. Yeah, Mr. and Mrs. Cause united they can't beat us, defeat us, or even diss us. So clearly get the picture, will we ever give up? No, just ask us, she'll tell you. That's why mama named the Hope.
Thanks for listening to episode 8 of the Mothers Podcast. You can find all of the episodes at unicornriot.ninja/The Mothers.
And to find out more about my work as an independent journalist, head over to my website, georgiafort.com.
And you can follow my work, Niko Georgiades, at Mr. Niko G on social media and nikog.work.
Audio recording and engineering by Malcolm Wells. You can find my work at stonywells.com and at stonywells on social media, STONYWELLZ.
What up, this is Longshot, and I provided the raps for the Mothers Podcast. You can support me and my work at mclongshot.com. Peace.
My name is Tarik Thornton. I help edit and produce along with DJ Skizz for Different Worlds Music Group. Peace.
My name is DJ Skizz. I made all the beats, as well as did the mixing and editing of the Mothers Podcast. You can check me out on social media at DJ Skizz, DJSKIZZ, or at DJSkizzBeats.com.
You could also follow Unicorn Riot across social media platforms and find our work at unicornriot.ninja. Unicorn Riot is a 501c3 educational nonprofit media organization dedicated to engaging and amplifying the stories of social and environmental struggles from the ground up. Support our work at unicornriot.ninja/donate.
Part of the funding for this podcast is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.